living. So you may
All
begin
right.
with introductions.
All right. First off, I want to say thank you to Eric for allowing SSPA to sponsor the colloquium tonight. And we have a wonderful guest speaker, Jeremiah Pearcey, and he has his doctorate in cognitive psychology. He is also a military veteran with over 15 years of experience working with various ethnicities, cultures, and ages. He also helps educate people at the Institute for Spirituality and Health. He has his own private practice, The Bright Connection, where he teaches people about the mind-body connection, how to reduce stress, maintain focus and motivation, and improve their livelihood. He also specializes in African American psychology, stress and stress management, and facilitating spiritual mystical experiences. And most importantly, he is a Saybrook alumni. So he graduated just a few years ago and he's been where we are. And so be very helpful for us to know how to transition from course to career and transforming our careers and adapting. So, and before I turn it over to you, Jeremiah, I just want to reiterate that this is more of a discussion and more of an open dialogue um, as Jeremiah's preference. So please do not be shy to ask questions or interject as we go. And Jeremiah, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you, Rebecca. And thank you all for having me here. It's my pleasure. I love doing events with Saybrook, so it's really a joy to come back, especially with the Psychophys group, uh, which was actually my tribe. Even though my degree is in psychology, most of the classes I took at Saybrook were Psychophys classes. So it's good to be here, good to be back, see some familiar faces. And as Rebecca said, I really want this to be kind of more of a discussion, be engaging, because this is a topic that is very nuanced. And, I could lay it all out with wonderful presentations, but if it's not applicable to you, then it doesn't really matter. So, what I really want to do is make sure that what I am offering or what I am saying is applicable to you all and relevant so that we're not wasting time and we're not just all over the place while not really focusing on the things or questions that you all have. So I kind of wanted to just start off by talking a little bit about my journey because my journey wasn't, I mean, to get to where I am today, it hasn't been easy. Um, after the after I graduated, so I graduated in August of 2019 with my PhD in psychology. And immediately I had already lined up this job in Washington, D.C., and where I was living at the time. And upon completing my program, and I was hired by this organization, but for some reason, the start date kept getting pushed back. And it got pushed back until January of 2020. And at that point, one of my good friends was living in Houston, and he had a job that had just opened at the University of Texas. So I ended up moving everything and coming here to Houston, and that was when the pandemic hit. So it was a really weird time because I didn't really know what to do or what steps to take, and I was pretty clueless, um, like what people in Texas were even looking for. And I know here, at least in Texas or Texans feel that everything in Texas is the best. So if you come from out of state and then with a degree from out of state, it's just a couple of more hurdles to jump through. And that may be something that you experience because I've experienced some bias against California schools, online schools. There's a lot of bias out there. So being cognizant of that, I think would be really beneficial so that you can kind of know what you're working with. And if you know your area well enough, then you should be able to find ways to get around those biases. Um, so anyways, I landed here, the pandemic happened, and I didn't have a plan. My backup plan if I got here and didn't have a job right away was to drive Uber But with the pandemic, Uber just didn't seem worth it at that point in time. And then the census came up, and I decided to do the census. So I did that for the time that the census was going. And then I got a job offer from the Institute for Spirituality and Health. And so I took that position and began to work with them. And it was really fulfilling in a lot of ways because I got to bring in some of the Saybrook experience that I had. So, for example, mystical experiences is what I did my dissertation on. I wanted to explore the psychophysiological mechanisms of sensory deprivation tanks and how they affect stress. So I designed a study around this, and it really had a similar kind of relation to what I was doing at the Institute. And so I found a really good niche. And while I was kind of getting involved with the Institute, or actually right before, I actually was put in contact through a really weird series of events because I didn't know any of the people in this chain really, but Shannon McLean, who is also a Saybrook alumna, was leaving Houston and going to Austin, and she sent out an email to the alumni group that she was moving to Austin and would like to find a position there. And so I replied to her and said, well, I'm moving to Houston. Do you have any connections there? And so she introduced me to the Institute. And while I was getting started there, I was introduced to Lisa Miller, who is a researcher out of Columbia University. She puts out amazing work on how spirituality affects us and why spirituality is important. And so they put me in contact with her, and right away she was excited to talk to me. She liked my background and decided to hire me. So I was coming right out of Saybrook, being hired at one of the most prestigious schools in the world as a researcher, and I was doing this special project with the Army where we were going to gauge spirituality and how it affects our military members. That was the goal of this study. But that was getting to where the pandemic was just starting to rise back up that fall, I believe, of 2020. And so as cases began to rise, Columbia came back and said, the grant that we were going for by the Army, it doesn't look like we're going to get it because they wanted to do in-person research, and with the pandemic, they just weren't sure. And so that ended up falling through, which was terribly, I can't even express how heartbreaking that was for me. It hurt, and it was really hard after that to find a path forward. Because, you get this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and everything else kind of seems not as important. So it was a period where I really had to figure out what I wanted and how to get there. And so ultimately, I played around with getting my clinical license because I really don't have any interest in doing clinical work, but I felt kind of stuck at that time. And so in feeling stuck, I decided to, kind of out of desperation, start my own business in January of 2021. And it was just kind of a side project. And at that time I was working part-time for Saybrook too. And so it was kind of a side project, but as I started doing it more and more, and I was helping people with stress. So I did stress management workshops. And I found out that I really loved it. And I liked it a lot, and the more I did it, the more I started to see the income from that, and the benefits, and all the clients that I did help. And it was something that really moved me, something that I never would have experienced had all of those fallen through. And then ultimately I would start working for the Institute for Spirituality and Health in around March of 2021. But getting that started, that initial, I feel like it was a catalyst because I had no expectations, I had no real plan to do this, and then it all just kind of fell together. And so as I worked for the Institute, which I actually just left the Institute just a couple months ago, but I decided, like, the more I worked at the Institute, the more I realized I enjoyed also working for myself and building something from scratch. And so I began to focus a little more on that, to the point where in I think March. In March, I was introduced to somebody at Goodwill, Southern California. I did a guided meditation for them, and they enjoyed it. They liked it a lot. So somebody passed that up the chain and said, hey, this guy does guided meditations. Maybe he could do one for you. And so I did another one, free of charge. So I did another one for Goodwill. They liked that one so much that they said, can you build a program around this? And so I began to build a stress management program for Goodwill Southern California, which is set to launch August 1st. Now, I say all that, I know that was a lot of information, most of it about me, and may not feel that it's really relevant to you. But one thing that I really want to convey is flexibility. Be flexible, because you're going to, or maybe you already have, an idea of what you want to do when your degree ends. But life doesn't hand us things, unfortunately. And it can be really difficult to find a path. So part of what I feel has led me here and the successes that I have had is being flexible, not so set in stone where you only have one idea of one thing that you want to do and that's what you're going for, and if that falls through, then that's it, or then you have to figure it out after that. So really be flexible as you prepare to end your time at Saybrook and get out on your own. Being flexible is the most important thing. And then I feel, find a way to turn your passion into work. Unless you already have a full-time job or know where you could get a full-time job once you finish your degree program, I think that it really would help. I lost my train of thought, sorry. I was saying something.
Talking about take your passion and turn it into your work.
Yes, yeah. Something relevant. Yeah, so take your passion and find a way to turn it into something that you can do. So I had never, when I left Saybrook, I had never thought about pursuing the work that I'm doing. I had never planned to work with people. I had always wanted to do research. That was my focus. But the pandemic came, research jobs went out the window. They weren't hiring because nobody knew, what was coming next. So finding that passion and realizing that that's what I wanted to do really made it so much easier after that, because then I'm not trying to figure out, what to do with my degree or how I'm going to do it. At that point, then it is, how can I continue to build on this? How can I continue to make money off of this? Because obviously we all have to survive, but also, how can I make this something that I want to do? And, coming from Saybrook, how can I also use it to change the world? So those are the two things that I would really impart on you, is be flexible and then find something that you're passionate about and really pursue that passion. Does anybody have any questions right now? Or any comments that you'd like to make?
I have a question.
Sure.
I'm just curious, I guess, were you always in this field? In the counseling field?
Yeah, that's a
Okay,
great question. No, I was not. When I was in the military, I was an airborne linguist. So my specialty was mostly cryptology, so cracking signals and speaking other languages. But it wasn't something that I wanted to do. So I went from my bachelor's is in business, and then I have a master's in leadership and one in organizational psychology. And so I really had no basis for doing a degree in psychology, except for I found that I loved psychology.
The only reason I'm asking is because I've been in accounting and, like retail and stuff like that for years. I've got almost 30 years accounting experience, and it's kind of like I'm doing a transition at this stage in my life, only because I wanted to wait until my daughter got into high school and she was kind of secure in her foundation as far as who she was and stuff. You know how up and down high school can be for them.
Yeah.
So I talked with her when she got into the 10th grade, and she was excited for me to go back to school. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. So I went ahead and went for my bachelor's. I've always wanted to work with kids, but it's like during the pandemic and stuff and having a child of my own, she was at that time the manager of her dance team. So I had a lot of the girls coming over, and I saw the differences in their attitudes and their behaviors and stuff when they came in. You know, some were real strict and real rigid, and some were just, you know, like they had really bad attitudes. Some were cold and cut off. And I don't know. It was just, it's different because people don't realize how much these kids take. I mean, they've got a lot of pressure from the parents. They're trying to make them do the things that they want them to do, not so much listening to the kid, but forcing them down a path that the parents want them to follow. There are, you know, kids that just don't feel heard and just a lot of different stuff. And so dealing with all these different kids that I saw come into the home because she was hosting parties and doing things and interacting with them, I was just like, my biggest thing is let the child grow and, you know, kind of guide them. Don't limit them so much in trying to tell them what to do. Find out what they want to do and then help them pursue that. And if it's not something they want to pursue, then of course, you know, kind of guide them. Well, what else is there? You know, just like prompt them along, but don't push them into something. And so
Yeah.
doing that, I saw, sorry.
I think that that's a good point about finding something that you're passionate about and figuring a way to turn it into something that you can do as a living. If you're not happy doing accounting, you've been doing it for 30 years, making that transition is going to be difficult. But if you know how to word your resume to take all of that experience and make it relevant to a field of psychology, that's where I would tell you to focus on what you are doing right now that translates to something you would do in psychology. So, but it's, it's difficult no matter what, because not having a background in something like psychology does make it more difficult to get into the field. But at the same time, I feel that if you can word it in a way that still piques interest, because not everybody's just looking for exact experience in psychology. Like, for example, that job offer that I got at Columbia, I had no experience, no research experience, no real psychological experience, but I put my best foot forward and I said, I guess, the right things, and that was what kind of pulled that in. So, but thank you for bringing that up.
Sure,
Jeremy,
thank
it
you.
remind me a lot of early on in my career. I used to read a lot of entrepreneurial books. I own a corporation. I had no background in business at all, but they talk a lot about a little bit what you were mentioning earlier about revenue streams. And in their case, the example was if you need a paper route to finance this part, any income is valuable income. It may not be your life's passion, but have a number of revenue streams going so that if one doesn't work out, something else does. So
Yeah.
keep your eyes on what your goal is, but in the meantime, you're going to eat too. So, when you were talking about Uber and the other types of things, I mean, it's exactly it. Those are not sidetracks. Those are revenue streams that allow you to keep going towards where you're wanting to go. And one of the phrases that they used, this guy is talking about how he eventually built up his empire, was the gut-wrenching anxiety of the unknown each time you launch on it. And the successful people who don't really refer to failures, they talk about inconveniences when something doesn't work out, or obstacles to where they're going, but they're able to keep their eyes on where they're going, or at least keep their eyes swiveling so that they can determine where they're going to go when they get there. So you're a nice living example of that approach.
Yeah, that is something that I have noticed that I do, and also something I feel is really important for what you're doing right now as a student, because there are so many future unknowns, and setting anything in stone will only, I feel, result in disappointment if you don't get it, or somehow cause some internal conflict. So yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, you didn't mention the word gut wrenching, but I felt that you probably had been there.
Gut wrenching is a good one. Yeah, I had a few of those.
One of the problems that our students face is just like what you face, Jeremiah. There's no license when you come out. And there are some states like Georgia where you can't use the techniques that you've learned without having a license. You know, you can train people who are well to do better, but you can't work with anybody who's got a diagnosed problem. So one of the students that we have that's just finishing up, Tyra Clay,
Mm.
she really wants to help individuals with problems like PMS. And you can't do that without a license, even though she has all the skills that she needs. Um, so she's looking at going to Fielding graduate school for a postdoc where you transform your non
Yeah.
clinical psychology degree into a clinical degree. And it's depending on what courses you have, it's a year to a year and a half. So that's something that everybody needs to keep in mind is if you get stuck, that you may be able to convert your degree.
Yeah, that is actually exactly what I was looking into when I felt kind of stuck. I was looking into Fielding. I think there's like two other universities
Yeah,
where you
there's
can.
a few. There's a
Yeah.
few around. And
So
you have to, of course, make sure that they're APA accredited and that they're, well, that's the key.
Although it still won't help you in Georgia because Georgia created their laws almost specifically against Fielding, even though it is an APA approved school. Uh, Probably because of lack of residency or something like that. They designed their one so that a new Fielding grad probably still couldn't get licensed in Georgia. So, but
Well, there's a postdoc,
yeah,
and that's how Fielding worked around it. But I'll let everybody know if it works.
yeah,
But yeah, Georgia's a real problem.
but that's a great point, Rich. So thank you for bringing that up. Uh, don't feel stuck. There are options. If you get, to the end of your program and you realize that maybe you do want to do clinical work, or that you don't want to do clinical work, but you feel you have to have the licensure to do it, um, then I think that's a viable option. Uh, I also think that it's okay to look at other degrees too. So since I graduated, I'm looking to do something either in psychopharmacology or something doing like psychopathology, but just something for my own interest because I feel it would help me do better at what I'm doing now. Like having that extra knowledge will help me get to a point where I can do my stress management programs better. I have a little more expertise in broader areas. So don't look at it like a failure. If that is the step that you have to take, then it's a step that you have to take. But, and one thing I was going to add to what you were saying earlier, Dr. Wilmarth, is finding things and how they connect. That's probably the thing that keeps me from getting down, like after Columbia and I lost that position. It helps when you can see how things connect and how you can use those. So for example, I did drive Uber for most of my PhD program. I did it on Fridays and Saturdays and sometimes throughout the week. But what I started to do with any job that I do actually now is try to find how that will help me in the future. So for example, anytime I drove Uber, I used it as a way to practice speaking in front of people. So I used it every time somebody got into the car, I would use it as an opportunity to be more comfortable in speaking about a topic that I know, like stress, or something like mystical experiences, or just to get more comfortable in myself. So if you can find those connections, like another example is I do stand-up comedy. And at first when I did stand-up comedy, I thought it had nothing to do with anything. right? I'm just doing this for myself. But the more I began to do stand up, the more I did it, the more I stood on the stage, the more I made people laugh, the easier it was to stand on the stage. I started to feel comfortable. And not only that, but being a good public speaker, typically you have to have some element of funny in there, which is why we have Dr. Wilmarth. He's a great example.
Or at least funny looking. Yeah.
Not your haircut.
Yeah.
I like your haircut.
Yeah, it's very nice, isn't it? We've got a couple people with their hands up here. We should probably rotate up around. Rebecca,
Yeah.
you're first, and then
Yes.
then Michael.
Yeah, so Jeremiah, you mentioned this whole like figuring out what you want to do and how to get there. And I find that for me, I'm the type of personality that loves every opportunity, and I could see myself doing anything and everything. For example, as I learned about biofeedback, I'm like, oh, I could become a physical therapist, or I could become an OB and do pelvic floor, or, and not all of it is really practical. Or when I really, really try to know who I am better, I discover that no, that isn't a career path I would actually enjoy. But sometimes it's hard for me to realize like what the real me would like, because I could see myself excelling in any direction I choose. And so I'm kind of curious what your personal approach is for like figuring out what you want, and then like how you work that. And I also, same for me, I don't have a clinical license. So I almost feel like everything I choose is like more schooling. And that might be the case if if it's something I'm going to love. But yeah, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's a difficult thing to like discover the passion. I mean, most people, I feel, they have things that they're interested in, but can those translate to a job that you would still enjoy doing? There's a lot of nuance there, but I would say if you can find something that you just love to talk about. Like for me, when I start talking about stress, I get excited. Like I love to talk about it. I love to explain it to people. I love seeing somebody's eyes light up when they're like, oh yeah, that's what I've been experiencing. So that's really what drove me. And the more I did it, the more I began to enjoy it. The more I really enjoyed it. And then I started to see how I can connect it to other things and find opportunities where I can make money and earn a living, but also get to do the thing that I love doing. So yeah, so I would say find something that you're passionate about, something that you can talk about with no end, something that you just love to talk about. You can engage with anybody, because that passion is what's going to drive everything else that you do. And if you're that passionate about something where you can talk to anybody about it and get them interested, or get them somehow involved with your own energy, I think that works out best for everybody. Because if you're doing something that you don't really enjoy, or something that maybe you don't even believe in, then you're going to have a lot higher chance of burning out. And yeah, and that's where we are, I feel like, as a society. We just, you kind of struggle through life not doing the thing that you really love, and then, you get to retire sometime maybe. But I feel like that is proven to be pretty terrible for society. So finding that passion, because if you can share that passion with your clients or patients or whatever, that is going to help you succeed. Does that kind of answer your question? I know it wasn't an exact answer.
Yeah, just honing in on that passion, what makes me excited.
Yeah, so yeah, I really think that talking about it, if you get excited about talking about it, then that's the kind of passion you need. So
okay.
Michael, you want to jump in?
Yeah, real quick. So Michael here, active duty Air Force guy. I'll start by saying for the crowd that I think I'm at fault for that small loss of Jeremiah's train of thought, because I sent a chat message I meant for everyone. His flexibility comments, mostly for Noah's sake. I sent a Semper Gumby that I wanted that to go to everyone, but it went directly to Jeremiah. But no. So I guess for your point on you're starting up your own company and you're figuring out how to translate your skills. I guess when you were doing that, the goodwill, just, hey, those people get stressed. I know a lot about stress, and you just reach out to them. Or I imagine that's one of the more difficult parts is when you're starting up, how you go about getting other folks interested, and then how to turn that into cash flow, right? So
yeah. So there was a movie that came out years ago now called Yes Man. I don't know if you've seen Yes Man, but essentially the premise of the show is there's this guy that was used to saying no all the time, and then he starts saying yes, and he starts seeing how saying yes changes his life. I think there's an element of that involved, of taking risk, because we tend to be risk averse for most people, and starting your own business is absolutely a risk. It's a risk on so many different levels, from the amount of time you put into it to the amount of money you put into it, and if you were even able to get it off the ground. For me, I got really lucky with Goodwill. Goodwill actually came out of something I was doing for Saybrook. Saybrook started Saybrook Serves, and I was working with Carmen Bowen, who's the Vice President of University Relations, and she somehow got a meeting with somebody at Goodwill. It wasn't the person I've been working with over the last few months, but she got me there. We talked about the Saybrook Serves project, and that we were going to, we wanted to do some relaxation or help them in some way, get our volunteers involved. And that one meeting turned into this contract that I now have with them. But it was only because I said yes to Carmen, because Carmen just asked me, she's like, hey, you want to come? I was like, sure, why not? And so I went and I did free things. And I know it sounds awful, because I feel there's there's an epidemic in this country of not paying people for work. But sometimes if you can see how that relates to you and how that can help you, and you think that there's a better chance of it helping you than not, then I say go for it. And I went for it with Goodwill. I actually did an 8-week program free of charge. So, it was an hour a week. I collected some data on the program, and I sent it back to them once we completed it. But those things that I did, mostly because I love doing them. I love doing the programs that I've created. I like helping people with stress, and that kind of led to that. So I would say probably the third most important thing, I know I'm just going to keep adding numbers, but the third most important thing is networking. If you are one of those people that's really good at networking, I think you can start your own business and succeed because you know how to connect with people. You know how to get somebody to like you. Because that's really what most of business is. You purchase from something you like or somebody that you like. We're driven by that attraction to somebody else, or to an entity even, an organization. Like, I'm attracted to Saybrook because I love its mission. I love the people that are there. It's just, it feels like home for me. But networking, you just never know where it's going to go. Even like I explained earlier with Columbia, that was from the most random email I've probably ever got, because I had no idea. I didn't even know that you could send emails to alumni until that point. So it was just like one random thing after another, and this person led me to this person, and that person led me to another person, and that person led me to Dr. Lisa Miller at Columbia University. And so that's where I really feel like being flexible is important, because you just never know what is going to happen. Another example, I reconnected with a high school friend because I was doing some work on my website and I wanted some help with the marketing portion of the website. And one of my friends from high school, who I hadn't really spoken to in like 15 years, was like, yeah, I'll help you with that. And so she started helping me with that. And then one day she was like, hey, I know this organization in Southern California and they could use some stress management. Do you want me to put you in touch with them? I was like, sure, why not? So a couple weeks after that, I fly out to California, meet with them. They are an assisted living facility in Southern California. And I meet with them and we get to talking, and it's just really good energy. And I liked what they were doing. They were launching this program called Vitality, and they're essentially trying to get all of these elderly folks healthier. And part of what they want to do is help them psychologically. And so they brought me in to help do like stress management and relaxation, but also for, cognitive benefits as well. But that came out of a person I hadn't talked to in 15 years. Just randomly said, yes, I'll help you with this. And then I said yes to her thing. And I paid the money to go out there. So I took a risk. I only had like a week or two time span. So I bought my ticket for like $600-$700, a little more than I normally would spend. But I took that risk and it paid off for me. So just another example of being flexible and really trying your best to network. Because ultimately, if you can network really well, somebody is going to come back to you. I can't even tell you how many times somebody has come to me randomly and just been like, yeah, my friend said that you do this. Can you help me? And those are the best connections. Word of mouth is the most powerful form of advertising. If you can get people to talk about you, if you can get people to vouch for you, then that's going to help you in the long run. And even so, I'm a military veteran too. I know, briefly touched on that. I was in the Air Force too, Michael. So, but I've had this passion to help veterans since I got out of the military. Because I went in, did 2 tours to Afghanistan, came back. They really encouraged us, because I had a top secret security clearance, they really encouraged us to not say anything and not admit that you had any mental health issues whatsoever. So I never did. So at 23, I went to war. And, when I get out of the military at 25, I am struggling. I'm struggling with stress. I don't know that that's the thing that I'm struggling with, but I was definitely struggling with stress. And so one of the passions that drives me is working with the VA to help veterans. Like, that's my passion. That and helping victims of sexual assault, because I volunteered at a sexual assault crisis center for 7 years. And so that's something I'm really passionate about. Like, I've heard so many stories and I just want to help them. And it's the same thing with veterans. And so those two things kind of combined to push me to do everything that I'm doing. But I say that just to say, I wanted to work with veterans so much, I reached out to the VA and started talking to people. And then a couple of people came to some events I hosted when I was with the Institute for Spirituality and Health. And those people loved the programs that I put on so much that they went to their leadership and talked to them about me and said, we need to get this guy in here. Last week, I get a random email from a department head, and she's like, I'm sorry this is so late, but I'm the only one that works in this department, and we need some help. And so she asked me to consult with the VA. She asked me to host some programs for the VA, and all of that out of my passion, out of my willingness to connect with people and network. So I really couldn't stress enough how important networking is. So networking, flexibility, and number 2, that one too, whatever it was. But
Awesome. Thank you.
What was that? Sorry.
No, that was perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, so I think it's hard, especially when you're starting your career. it's really hard to see what the path holds for you, what your future holds for you. And that can make some people risk averse, where they just want to take the easy road, and so they'll go work for somebody else or go work in a place that they don't really want to work and do it to make money while not really pursuing the things that they love. So even if you don't get that job that you want right away, keep plugging away. Try to find a different avenue. My ultimate goal with my organization is to start preventative stress clinics across the country. Like, that's what I want to do. I want to turn my stress management business into a clinic where you could go and talk to somebody and say, I'm dealing with a lot of stress. What do I need to do to stop being stressed? How can I help myself right now? Because we do so little for preventative medicine. And so that's my goal. That's the thing that drives me every single day. And I won't stop till I get there. I have no idea how I'm going to do it. It's so much bigger than anything I have right now. Like, I can't plot that out. I can't plan it out. All I know is that if I keep networking with people, somebody eventually is going to say, hey, why don't you meet these people? It's a group of investors. We think your idea is good, or something like that. So that's really what drives me and how my mind kind of works when you are in a position where you may not have a lot of information. Does that all make sense? Does anybody else? Peggy, you have a question?
Yes, I was curious as far as, because I've always been thinking about the whole thing with the nonprofit versus for-profit. How do you make a decision as to which is better? Because the nonprofit, I'm thinking, is for people that are like low income, stuff like that. Because like you, I'm dating someone who's in the military, so I've seen a lot of the side effects and stuff of people that have been in the military. He's lost friends to suicide and stuff with the pandemic, just a lot of things. So I'm trying to figure out a way to bring a group of people together from our youth side, young adults, and then from our veterans, to where they could possibly work with each other in order to give the military veterans a mission, get them to have something to look forward to, reaching out to these kids, helping to guide them, so on, and the kids some kind of security, having someone just to be able to be there that they can talk to without fear of judgment and ridicule, and get true real life experience, to guide them.
Yeah. Well,
And I'm just trying to figure out one over the other.
So I played around with this idea too, whether I should go the nonprofit route or the for-profit route. Ultimately, for me, it would be much more difficult to have done it from a nonprofit route, and it constrains you in a lot of ways. Now, I'm not an expert on either entity, so I really couldn't give you advice on that. But, for a nonprofit, most nonprofits get money from other people. So you have to be able to network. And probably before you even start, you have to have a network of people that are going to give you money, or at least know of organizations or grants, funding opportunities where you can do that. And for me, that just wasn't, I didn't see that as being sustainable, not for the goals that I have.
Right.
If you wanted to do a smaller organization and focus, let's say, your hometown or something like that, then absolutely a nonprofit may work. You can apply for government grants. There's corporate grants even, all kinds of funding opportunities, but it does limit your income because you can't really sell stuff. It has to be in the form of like donations. So it makes it really difficult. For me, setting up a for-profit was fairly simple. I used Zen Business or something like that. Took me about a week to get my documents, and I don't really have any constraints. And there's not, because another thing is you have to know the laws around nonprofits too.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something that you probably need to know before you start a nonprofit. And I just didn't have, it just didn't seem like a route that I needed to go at all. But that said, I did talk to an individual that owns his own nonprofit and for-profit business. So he owns and operates both, and you can do that. And in fact, I know somebody here that owns her own nonprofit, but she also has a for-profit therapy or counseling clinic that she does. And so she manages both, but her time is pulled, and it's difficult to raise money. I mean, that's especially post-COVID. I would assume that it's even more difficult to raise money. So that's just something to keep in mind. Does that answer your
Yes.
question? I know.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Does anybody else have any questions? Otherwise, I'll get to the list that Rebecca sent me.
Rebecca,
Okay.
you said a list of questions.
Yeah, that was, I like to be prepared to know what I'm going to talk about. So, let's see. Okay, so we kind of talked about the first steps after you finish your doctoral degree or whatever program you're in at Saybrook. So I don't really think we need to touch on that anymore. But if you have questions about that, feel free to ask. I'd be happy to answer them. One of the questions was how to deal with the stress of imposter syndrome. And I think that's a really good question because, as you might imagine, I felt a lot of the imposter syndrome. Especially, when the pandemic started, the imposter came in. You're a doctor, you can't even find a job, right? Imposter syndrome, if you don't know, is kind of like an imposter in your head that's telling you you don't belong. So, and then when like Columbia came, that was another opportunity. And when I was interviewing for that position, I was like, there's no way they're going to pick me. It's like, they're never going to pick me out of this hat of PhD candidates. Like, I felt like I had no chance at all, but I said, whatever, I'm just going to submit, the best I can and hope. And it was enough. So, just to say, the imposter will likely always be there. But how you manage it is really important. And I think that really comes down to managing your own expectations. Because if you expect something to go a specific way and then it doesn't, you're likely to be critical of yourself or, find yourself in a weird position. So managing your expectations, I feel, is the most important thing. And it was really hard for me to manage my expectations even after Columbia, because at that point I felt defeated, right? I just lost this job opportunity. What am I going to do now? Nobody else is going to hire me here in Texas. I'm struggling finding a job. And all those kinds of voices and thoughts come in. But setting little goals for yourself can help kind of move past that. So one thing, I actually wrote an article on it for one of Saybrook's alumni newsletters. But I rock climb. I mostly do indoor rock climbing, but I do some outdoor. But the thing about indoor rock climbing that I really love is that every time I climb, I'm just a little bit better. That one route, because there's basically routes that go like up the wall, you follow a specific color. And so they leave them there for a month, sometimes 2 months. And so you get to practice and do it over and over and over. And every time you do it, you get better and better. But every time I go in and I can do something just a little bit better, it's uplifting, right? It's a confidence booster because you are setting a goal, but that goal is achievable. And that's really important. So set for yourself achievable goals and set them small. Like I have my big goal of, being a national organization and trying to help people prevent stress all across the country and maybe even the world one day. But that isn't my next step. I'm not going from my little business now to suddenly a multinational conglomeration. And I think that's important, to find what steps you can take that will help get you there, and also realize what steps you've already taken that will get you there. So for example, with me, we'll just say networking in general, right? Doing things like stand up, which I couldn't see at the time, but now I can clearly see how much better it makes me as an engaging speaker, and also to win people over and get them to like me. I've kind of learned some skills on how to get people to like me, whether it's through like self-deprecating humor, where you make fun of yourself a little bit, that eases the tension, or whatever it may be. But really seeing how all the skills you have, because you all have skills, you all have expertise in some area, even if you don't think it's valuable to whatever your end goal is, I would almost guarantee you there is some kind of connection that will help you. And so all of that together, I feel, is a good buffer against the imposter syndrome. Because if you're constantly achieving small goals even, you're constantly reinforcing or building confidence in yourself. You're constantly building confidence, you're moving forward, and then you'll start to see how everything connects the more you move. Hindsight's 20/20, but sometimes foresight can be 20/22. If you really sit and think. So that was the imposter syndrome. Does anybody have questions about that? Okay. And then the second one was how to create an online presence and what are the benefits of an online presence. So we have about 7 minutes, so I'll try to get through this a little quickly. Online presence is probably the most important thing you can do if you're starting your own business. If that's your goal, to start your own business and start finding clients or somehow generating revenue, then that's an important step. If you're not online, you probably barely exist in society. Like, nobody's going to find you. So it's really the most important thing you could do for a business. Now, there are several ways to do this. So when I first started my business, I used an app called Thumbtack. It's very similar to Fiverr. Basically, you put yourself on there as a professional or an expert in a certain category, and then people go to this app and they look for people like you. And that was how I started. And I started doing stress management sessions for, I think it was like $30, $40 an hour is what I started at. And as I started to build up my reviews, I realized that I could charge more. Most of the people that I was working alongside they had their price set to about $100 an hour. And so I started to kind of creep mine up, but I didn't want it to get too high. But that's where I got my living for several months, when I had no other income besides the part-time job at Saybrook. That was how I made my living. So you can use things like that. Software like that will help you establish an online presence. But there's also other important things like having social media accounts, having a Facebook and Instagram. Now I would even encourage you to have a TikTok. Recently, it was in the news, but TikTok was the #1 most visited site in the world, surpassing Google. I mean, if you just think about that, some people are using TikTok more than they're Googling things. That is huge. That just shows you how many millions and millions of people are on that platform, how many millions and millions of people that could be your potential clients or customers. So get that social media presence going. And you can do things like writing articles. So I have a couple of things that I've published, but none of them scientifically yet. It's something I'm still working on. But there's other ways to publish. You can look up places like Medium. You can publish on there. I wrote an article for Goodwill that they published on their website. So when you Google me, that's one of the things that pops up. So really having a strong online presence is, I feel, a necessity if you plan to use your own business and succeed. Because otherwise you're going to get to a barrier at some point, and it's really going to be difficult, if not impossible, to promote your business or move it forward. And then something else on like the benefits of an online presence. So I somebody scheduled a consultation with me out of the blue. Had not talked to that person at all. And so when I got them on the phone for the consultation, I said, "How did you find out about me?" And she said, "Well, I did this thing like 2 years ago. It's like a local TV station. They maybe have a couple thousand viewers, if that. But I did this interview there," and she said, "I watched your interview, and that's how I found you." Blew me away. I had never thought that that would do that. So all of this together, just I hope that really shows you how strong an online presence can be and how necessary it is today. Does anybody have any questions about that one?
Just one point, Jeremy, that if you start your own business, you've got to consider carefully who your real customers are. In my case, it's not the individual patients; it's the physicians that are my primary customers. They're the ones that send me all my referrals. So I don't ever advertise to the outside world. I stay personally connected to that group of physicians. So sometimes you don't have to have the whole world. You need to have a smaller segment of it that may be important. But you also have to decide when it comes to keeping people happy. You always want to keep your customers happy. You got to remember who the real customers are. And in my case, I consider the physicians my customers every much as my patients, because they're the ones that really drive the thing that way. And I feel guilty a lot of times about not promoting or advertising, but in 25 years, we've just been too busy to have time to advertise. So sometimes you can take a smaller target and do it more intensively rather than trying to, bring in the whole world to your door.
Absolutely. That's a great point too. So thank you for that, Dr. Wilmarth. Because it really, it's what your goals, or however you can propel your goals forward. So if you're like Dr. Wilmarth and you're working with a specific group of people in hospitals, then obviously that's where you need to go to find them. But having an online presence, if you're trying to get clients from anywhere, especially if you're doing virtual stuff, is very important. But be cognizant of who your clients are. So my clients, I don't really do individual clients. My clients are corporations, businesses, organizations, nonprofits. That's who I work with. So I market myself to organizations. I talk to people within the organization, and get them to kind of move that up the chain. So yeah, find out who you want to target too, like veterans, victims of sexual assault. Like, I have to go to those places. It's probably highly unlikely that I'll just get a whole bunch of those clients from somewhere else. So, but by focusing on like the VA and offering my services to the VA and things in that capacity, and working with, because I work with a nonprofit that helps survivors of sex trafficking. And so, doing those two things and really partnering with them allows me to do the thing I'm passionate about and still earn a living. So, great point. Thanks, Dr. Wilmarth. But that's essentially it for me. So unless you all
I have
questions.
one question about networking. So I love to network. In fact, I'm going to the ISNR conference in a week, and I'm going to get a lot of contacts and a lot of people to network with. But what I want to know is the best way, like what's the step you do after you've networked? Because I don't want to waste their time. I don't want them to waste my time. But I want to follow up and be like, hey, it was great talking to you. Like, what's the next step for after you've made contacts and how to proceed forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm sure it differs depending on who you are. But for myself, I tend to think about networking before when I'm being introduced to a person. Like, so the other day I was working with this assisted living facility, and they actually brought in a researcher from University of California at Long Beach. And so this researcher was there talking about this study that she's doing on geriatric patients. And so I kind of just laid out some of the things that I do, and we connected. And so in the email that I sent to her, I said, hey, this is what I'm doing. Here's some information about what I do. You can go to my website and watch some of my videos here. If you would like to collaborate in the future, let me know. Let's set up a Zoom session and talk about how we can collaborate. And that's usually how I frame it, because it also has to be in that person's interest. Like, if they don't see any benefit to talking to you, it's going to be a little more difficult to get them to the place where maybe they would want to work with you. So I always frame it as, let's find a way that we can collaborate. And so I collaborated with the nutritionist that works there, and am on the verge of getting involved with the study that they're doing and using the psychological methods to do that. So keeping it open, but somehow making it specific too. Specific as in, I would like to collaborate with you. I think you could, or I think we could do something around this field or in this area, but kind of throw out an idea, get their mind jogging. I think that works for me. Actually, on another point, so I networked a few years ago, and I met this really interesting guy who is a specialist in pitches. Like, he does a lot of the pitches for tech companies in like California. He'll pitch the idea or whatever to investors, to other corporations, things like that. And anyways, he was a really interesting guy. He was interested in my research, so we got to talking, and I started to ask him about, what's the best way that we can network and connect with people. And his idea was to ask them a question that is relevant to them and you. So something like, for example, if I'm going to work with Goodwill, a question that I could ask somebody in that field is, do you feel that stress affects your employees, and would stress management help them? Or how does stress affect your employees at your organization? But leading with a question gets them to think about things in a different context. And if you put yourself into that question, then they have to think about, oh, what would I do with this person? So if you can get them to kind of see how you can work together or how collaborating would benefit them, I feel like that's the best way to move forward with people that you don't know.
And may I add to that?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what I want to say is, don't fabricate and don't push it. If you are passionate and authentic, and your connection with them is real, all the algorithms in the world are not going to change that. If you're not authentic and you're sending emails to the effect of whatever, that is, prescribed in the protocol of sending the follow-up emails, you're not going to get very far. Or if you do get somewhat far, it's going to lead to something that it really probably isn't going to work out in the long run. I just think, follow your passion, follow your heart. And the connections, they're just going to come. They're just going to happen. And I think Jeremiah, geez, I can't believe I did that because I've been so conscientious about calling you Jeremiah all this time. I hear what you're saying, and you're extremely passionate and extremely positive. But if you weren't, and you were giving all this advice, I don't think the advice is meaningful without the authenticity and the positiveness and the belief and the passion that you have.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for adding that in. I mean, obviously, I would agree with Dr. Kirsten, but yeah, show your passion. If you can wear your passion on your sleeve, you know, it draws people in versus pushing them away. When they see your excitement, when they see your energy, you know, it's almost irresistible for certain people. For myself, if I see somebody that's doing that, I want to know about them. I want to learn about them.
Right.
And if you get somebody to want to learn about you and learn what you do, there you go. There's your door.
Just be true to yourself, and you know, 100%.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Anything else?
Just a great big thank you for taking your time tonight and sharing your words, and greatly appreciated.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. You know,
And
I always
it's really
love being part
great
of
to
the
follow
Psycho
up on how you're doing.
Yeah, I know. It's so nice to hear your voice.
Yeah.
You should probably mention what your first postgraduate course was.
My first postgraduate course, hypnosis.
Hey,
Oh,
what a great choice.
Eric, that was so self-serving. But it shows your passion and your authenticity.
Yeah. Well, I love hypnosis. I love psychophys, and it's all served me much better than I could have ever imagined. So, thank you all for having me, and
Thank
let's
you
do it
so
again
much.
sometime.
Thank you so much, Jeremiah. Now, we also mentioned if people wanted to contact you or reach
Yes.
out to you.
Yeah, I'll put my information in the chat. So that's my website. And my email, and you can get a hold of me there. And I have a Saybrook email too, so if all else fails, feel free to look me up on the Saybrook website and
What's the
Wonderful. Thank
LLC
you.
extension? LLC, what is that extension?
yeah, it's just one of the extensions you can choose now. There are so many .coms that are taken,
Oh,
they've
yeah.
just kind of branched out. So
Yeah, mine is .training. Yeah, no, I get it.
okay, yeah. Yeah, so feel free to reach out, contact me if you want to network. Please feel free to take my email address and shoot me an email. But
Thank you so much. Thank you, guys. Nice to see everyone.
it's great seeing you all.
Lovely to meet you, Peggy. I loved all your questions, and
Thank you.
yeah, it was really nice to meet you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Great meeting y'all too. Y'all have a good night.
You too.